So this is Michael, because he knows I don't do podiums. It was 1996. I had just moved back to Annapolis, and I had a slow leak in the tire of my car. And where do you think people told me to go? Right? So I went over to the Eastport Shell, and I had just driven in from DC. I had on my heels and my business suit on, and I walk into the Eastport Shell, and this man walks out in the uniform with the Shell station thing on it and a little bit of grease under the nails. And he said, "Oh, I can fix that for you while you wait." I said, "Okay." And that's how I found myself standing inside the bays of the Eastport Shell station while he rolled that tire in the water. And he started asking me questions. Yeah. And before I knew it, just like that, I was telling him my story. Now, we've heard a lot about the things that he's contributed, and that was really important to me to have that voice in the room, because he's contributed so much to this community. We literally would not know Annapolis the way we do today. It literally would not have the structure that it has today, was it not for the work that he and Will and others, Eileen is here, that did on the Planning Commission. And all of that is what I like to say, it's BS, it's before Shelley. He's done so much. And yet it strikes me that what we contribute is not the same as who we are. And one of the things that Michael was, it's so hard to say that. He was a collector and a teller of stories. My story, Linnea's story, your story, watermen's stories, boat builder stories, business people's stories. He was a collector and a teller of stories. As I told him my story, I shared with him that I had just moved back, but I had traveled all over the country with my job. And that while I really loved all those experiences and living in all different parts of the country, that what I wanted out of my time in Annapolis was to know neighbors, to know what it was like to be a part of the community, to contribute to the community. Now let me ask you, can you think of anybody better to say those words to than Mike Miron? He said, "Oh, you're a transportation engineer. You need to call Will Scott on the Planning Commission because we got some transportation issues going on." Some things don't change, right? And he gave me Will's phone number.
He only listened to you.
Well, right. And then he said, "You know, we've just started a new comprehensive plan committee. You need to call John Arison and ask him to put you on it. And here's his number." And John, do you remember? You did.
Yeah, I did.
And then he said, "And you need to become involved in the Eastport Civic Association." And he did all that because that's the other thing he was. He was a connector. Look around this room. Who do you see here that you're connected to? Because he facilitated that connection. He was a connector. So a couple years went by, and I would see Michael at ECA meetings. And we ended up working on the Eastport Gateway Ordinance together. And there was a time when I had to take some maps over to drop off. And he said, "That's great, bring them on by. I'm not going to be home, but just drop them in the mailbox." And it's 531 6th Street. So I remember so vividly driving up to 531 6th Street and pulling up in front of the house and thinking, "Well, that's a pretty cool house." And I walked up the pathway, and the mailbox was right there, and I put the maps in the mailbox. And the front door was then as it is now. It's all this leaded glass, clear leaded glass, very intricate pattern. And I thought, he's not here. no one's watching. And I pressed my face against that glass to try to see what the inside of this pretty cool house looked like. The problem is that the glass slivers are a little tiny, so I went all over the door trying to find one big enough to see inside the house that would become my home for 17 years. And then Michael, he invited me over for dinner. And I said, "You mean you want to invite me out for dinner?" And he said, No, I want to invite you over for dinner. I'll cook for you. I thought, this should be good. So I went over to dinner, and I don't remember what he made. And I'm so sorry, sweetie, because he'd be able to tell you exactly what he made. And the reason I don't remember it is because I was so stunned. He was in the kitchen doing that skillet thing. Remember how we do with the green beans? Yeah. And I toss it like, and then he said to me, he said, "So excuse me just a minute, I need to run out back and clip a couple of herbs." And I'm thinking, well, this is not what I expected, but it's getting off to a really good start. That would become, like Linnea, the first of, so many meals that he would make for me and for so many of you. And see, to me, that's the little bitty tip of the iceberg about the other thing that Michael was, and that's a nurturer. And you heard it with Linnea. And for me, see, it wasn't about the fact that he did all the grocery shopping. I had to go to Giant last week. I walked in and thought, they remodeled in the last 10 years. And it wasn't about that he did all the grocery shopping, that he always put gas in the car. I was going to put in the wrong kind of gas, and he said, "You seriously, you didn't know what kind of gas the car takes?" He fixed every single thing in the house. He fixed everything in the house. And he made me gluten-free bread every 2 weeks. And the nurturing, it wasn't about any of that. Except possibly the bread thing. That was actually pretty cool. But what it was about, particularly for me, he was a nurturer of my aspirations and my dreams, just like he did for his daughter. Even when those aspirations and dreams weren't his. Especially when they weren't his. And he nurtured mine as though they were. He biked next to me as I trained for the New York City Marathon. Now, Michael and I had very different ideas. Actually, I don't really know that. I think we had different ideas about spirituality. And so while I'm doing Qigong and I'm meditating and I'm doing shamanic journeying, that was not Michael's thing. But I'd come back from meditating, he'd say, "So tell me about that." I'd come back to a Qigong class and he'd say, "Tell me about that." I'd come back from running and he'd say, "Tell me about that. Tell me about it." And that's what he would say all the time, because he was our nurturer. And that brings me to our time in France. Now just imagine that you and your spouse, you're doing great, right? You both have really great jobs. It's going great. The money's coming in, everything feels good, it's easy. And your spouse comes to you, your partner comes to you and says, "Hey, what would you think if we just threw all that away and we moved to France for a year?" Now, I tell that story in the programs that I do. And Michael has sat in the back so many times and listened to me tell that story. And when I got to that part, when I say, "Imagine what your partner would say," he would be back there just beaming, because he knew that what they were thinking was not what he said to me. Because what he said to me was, "Okay, let's do it." And he made that dream his. And he gave it 110% because he was always about supporting my aspirations and my dreams. Michael and I, we've literally traveled the world together. Maggie, you took this picture, remember? My friend Bobby Sue took this picture. We traveled the world together, and even in the traveling of the world together, it wasn't about those experiences, it was about the world we made from those experiences. I will confess that I'd learned a secret. I could get him to go pretty much anything I wanted him to go to, as long as it involved a circus, a farmer's market, or a train. Worked pretty much every time. Michael and I were married in 1999 aboard a Trumpy yacht. It was right after he had organized the Trumpy Yacht Association. Perhaps some of you remember that weekend in Annapolis when City Dock was lined with Trumpy yachts. It was a great day for the city of Annapolis, all those yachts coming back home. We were married aboard one of those yachts. Now at the time, Michael's friends, and since then, teased him a lot about me. They would say something like, "How did a guy like you get hurt?" For 17 years, I didn't know the answer until Linnea told me. She said, "He picked you." Guess what? He picked you. He picked all of us. With every little kindness, every little tenderness, every jar of jam, he picked us. God, he loved the canning, the tomatoes, the pickles, the jam, the applesauce from the apples in our backyard. Who here has ever received a jar of jam or jar from Michael? Right. Keep your hands up if you still have the jar. We come home and there would just be piles of jars outside the back door. He picked us. And it was Linnea that articulated it for me. She said she was watching all these people come by, and the cards and the letters and the text messages and all the things. And she said, "We are his life's work." We're his life's work. Aren't we the lucky ones? We aren't the only thing that was his life's work. It's been mentioned about his history and the work that he's done here. He's done 150 oral histories because he's a teller and collector of stories. He literally has the voices of the people who've made this community. 150 of them. File folders full of information. And I'm so happy to say that we're working with the museum, the staff, the volunteers to begin that tedious process of cataloging all of that information so that they can digitize it, so they can preserve it, so we can make it available so other people get to hear the stories that were so important to him to tell. And that's the reason that when people have asked what can we do, that we say, help the museum. Because that's going to help them take those stories that Michael cares so much about and give them to others. Michael was in the hospital when I told him that he didn't have a future. And I watched as that understanding began to spread across his face. And I watched as his eyes began to glisten. And he looked at me and he said, "I'm going to miss you so much." And now Michael is off on some grand adventure that I can't participate in. Maybe just a tiny little bit. And we're the ones that are going to miss him so much. And I hope that is some consolation to you as it is to me to know how lucky we are, how lucky we've been. I only got 17 years. There's some of you that got over 30. Oh my God, 30 years. Linnea's entire life. We're so lucky. And for me, I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful. I got to live the life of my dreams with the man of my dreams. And let me just tell you, there is nothing like it in the world. Thank you so much for being part of this today. He would have loved knowing that you love him.